There was a man who lived in the apartment above mine for almost 3 years. I'd see him in the hallway sometimes, early mornings, late evenings, occasionally on Sunday afternoons when the building was so quiet you could hear the elevator humming 2 floors down. He always had a book tucked under his arm. He cooked elaborate meals for one. I could smell garlic and something warm and herbed drifting down the stairwell. On weeknights, he went to the cinema alone. He laughed easily at small things, at nothing in particular. He had friends who came and went, and he seemed genuinely glad when they left. Not relieved, not secretly deflated, just settled, complete in a way I couldn't quite name at the time. In a way that made me slightly uncomfortable without knowing why. I was in my mid-20s then, and I remember finding him vaguely unsettling. Not in a frightening way, but in the way something unsettles you when it refuses to fit the category you've placed it in. He wasn't sad. He wasn't waiting. He wasn't performing contentment while quietly hoping for a different life to arrive at the door. He just was, fully, plainly, without apology, without a partner, without a trajectory bending toward one. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I filed it away as a curiosity, as an exception, as a mystery I didn't yet have the language for. It would take me years to understand what I was actually seeing, because somewhere in your mid-20s, or your 30s, or whenever the people around you begin to pair off in a way that feels sudden and somehow coordinated, like a signal went out that you didn't receive, something quiet happens inside you. It doesn't announce itself. There's no single moment where you sit down and think, I am now afraid. It arrives in smaller doses than that. A wedding invitation, a birth announcement posted at 7 in the morning, a Sunday dinner where someone asks again if you're seeing anyone, and you say no, again, and then you change the subject because the weight of the pause that follows is heavier than it has any right to be. And you start watching, not consciously, not with any bitterness, at least not at first. You just notice things. You notice the ease with which some people seem to fall into love. The way it happens for them without the grinding self examination, without the post date analysis sessions where you sit on the edge of your bed trying to figure out what you said wrong. For them, it just occurs, like weather. And for you, it doesn't, or it almost does. And that almost is its own particular kind of weight. And then it doesn't. And the distance between the life you're living and the life you expected starts to feel less like a delay and more like a verdict. You don't say this out loud. That's the thing about this specific fear. It lives entirely in the interior. It moves through you like background noise you've stopped noticing, but that's still there, still shaping things. And underneath it, just barely audible, is a question you haven't quite let yourself finish. The question, if you pulled it all the way into the light, would sound something like this. What if something is just wrong with me? Nobody tells you that love is optional. They tell you almost everything else. That careers are complicated, that money is stressful, that friendships require maintenance, that family is imperfect and sometimes painful, and sometimes wonderful, and usually both at once. But romantic love, the kind that becomes a partnership, a home, a life genuinely built alongside another person, that they treat as inevitable, not a possibility, a given. Think about where you absorb this. Not just from romantic comedies, though those certainly helped install it. Boy Meets Girl, Complication, Resolution, Kiss in the Rain, Credits. Think about the subtler sources, the way engagement photos appear on your feed, not as announcements, but as evidence of a kind of membership. The family narratives where the aunts ask the same question every year, the language we use, settling down, finding someone, starting a life, as though life hasn't properly started yet, as though what you're doing right now is a kind of holding pattern. What this creates, quietly and over time, is a template, and the template says, this is what a real life looks like. It involves another person at the center of it. And if your life doesn't look like that, not yet or not ever, then something has gone wrong. Not in the world, in you. That's the part that does the damage, not the absence itself, but the interpretation of the absence as failure. So you try. That part is important to say. You try. You put yourself out there. You go on the dates. You download the apps and feel vaguely hollow scrolling through them, and download them again 6 months later and feel the same way. You work on yourself genuinely, earnestly. You read the books, you do the therapy, you get clear on who you are and what you want and what you're no longer willing to settle for. You become, in some measurable way, a better version of yourself. And some of it works in the sense that you feel more grounded, more honest, more present, and none of it produces the outcome you were told it would produce, which is the part that quietly breaks something because you were told implicitly, everywhere, always, that self improvement was the path. That if you just worked enough on your attachment style, your communication patterns, your capacity for vulnerability, the result would follow. Put in the growth, receive the love, and you did the growth, and you kept waiting for the other side of the transaction to arrive. And there were almost connections. That's the part nobody prepares you for. The person you dated for 3 months, who you genuinely liked, who liked you back, and then one day the energy shifted and neither of you could say exactly why. The one who was right in most ways, but wrong in one specific way, that turned out to matter enormously. The one who came at the wrong time. These almost connections accumulate. They leave a residue. And you start to wonder whether the pattern itself is telling you something. Maybe it's timing, or maybe something else entirely is going on. Let me offer you a parallel, not as a solution. I'm not trying to package something this complicated into a tidy analogy, but as a way of seeing the thing from a slightly different angle. Think about purpose. Think about the people you know who have a clear, burning sense of vocation, who knew from early on what they were meant to do, who feel genuinely called by their work, who wake up and the work itself feels like an expression of something essential in them. They exist. You've probably met a few, and they're remarkable to watch. But here's what's also true: they're not the majority. Most people don't experience work that way. Most people build meaningful lives, rich lives, lives full of contribution and engagement and even joy without ever having that particular experience of calling. And we don't pathologize them for it. We don't say something is wrong with them because they never found their one true purpose. We understand that vocation, when it exists, is a gift, a particular configuration of person and circumstance and timing, but we don't treat its absence as failure. What if love works the same way? What if nothing is wrong with you? I want to sit with that for a moment because I think we move past it too quickly. We say it as reassurance, nothing is wrong with you, and then we immediately follow it with you just haven't met the right person yet, which reinstates the entire framework we were supposedly dismantling. But what if we meant it differently? What if nothing being wrong with you meant your life is not broken? The absence of a romantic partner is not a hole where something should be. It is simply one of many possible configurations of a human life, not the inferior one, just a different one. Some lives unfold differently. That's not a consolation, that's a fact. Different doesn't mean broken. I want to say that again because it's the kind of thing that sounds simple and is actually quite hard to absorb. Different doesn't mean broken. The shape of your life, its particular texture, its specific mix of closeness and solitude, and creative preoccupation, and friendship, and quiet, that shape is not evidence of something gone wrong. It is simply your shape, and shapes don't fail. They're just shapes. The connections you already have, the friendships that have lasted years, the people who know the specific quality of your humor, who you call when something happens before you've even decided to call anyone, those are not consolation prizes. They are not what you settle for in the absence of the real thing. They are, in many cases, more honest and more durable than a lot of romantic relationships. They've survived without the architecture of obligation. They exist because someone keeps choosing to show up, and so do you. And there are other forms of connection that don't involve people at all. the connection to a piece of work you're genuinely invested in, the way a specific kind of music can locate you in your own body when you'd started to drift out of it, the relationship you develop with a place, a city, a stretch of coastline, a particular corner of a particular park at a particular time of day. These are not lesser forms of a life, they are a life. And solitude, actual solitude, not the lonely kind, but the nourishing kind, has a texture to it that only people who've learned to inhabit it can really describe. It's not emptiness, it's more like space, room to hear yourself, room to follow a thought all the way to its end, room to be strange and private, which is actually one of the great underrated freedoms. There is something that happens when you stop apologizing for the shape of your days. When the Sunday morning that used to feel like evidence of loneliness starts to feel like what it actually is, a Sunday morning with coffee and silence and whatever you want to read. It takes time. The reorientation doesn't happen in a single moment of insight. It happens in increments, in small reversals of habit, in the gradual discovery that the life you're living is more substantial than you'd been giving it credit for. But it does happen. And when it does, something loosens. Not because you've resigned yourself, not because you've decided to pretend you don't want what you want, but because you've stopped measuring the worth of your days against a metric that was never yours to begin with. I want to talk about the specific texture of a life that doesn't follow the expected shape because I think it gets described too often in terms of what it lacks. The partner, the shared household, the built-in witness to your daily existence. And that framing, even when sympathetic, keeps the deficit at the center. What it actually contains is harder to name because our language for it is thinner. We have elaborate vocabularies for romantic love, its stages, its ruptures, its repairs. We have the whole architecture of couples therapy, of attachment theory, of love languages and bids for connection. We have almost nothing for the specific richness of a life built primarily around friendship, creative work, solitude, and a deep relationship with one's own interior. Almost nothing, except the lives themselves. Think about what you actually know, not what you've been told to expect, but what you've genuinely observed of the people who've built this kind of life well. There's a quality of attention in them, a fineness of perception. They tend to have developed, over years, an unusually clear relationship with their own experience, what they think, what they feel, what they actually want as opposed to what they're supposed to want. They have more practice being alone with themselves than most people get, and that practice, over time, produces something. Not solitude as deprivation, solitude as skill, as intimacy with oneself, which is not narcissism, it's closer to the opposite. It's the capacity to sit with your own experience without flinching, without immediately reaching for distraction or company, or the comforting noise of another person's presence. That capacity is rare, and it is not nothing. There's a particular kind of relief that comes when you stop running towards something that may not be your destination. It's not defeat, it's not resignation, it's not the flat gray of giving up. It's something closer to putting down a heavy bag you'd forgotten you were carrying. And once you put it down, you start to notice things you hadn't been able to notice before. Because your attention had been so entirely absorbed by the weight, you notice that the life you've been treating as a waiting room is actually a life. It has already accumulated things worth having. It has texture and history and its own specific kind of beauty that you've been half seeing because you were always oriented toward the thing you didn't have. What changes when you stop trying to fit the script? Quite a lot, it turns out. The friendship you've been treating as a placeholder starts to reveal itself as what it actually is, one of the central relationships of your life. The work you've been doing in the margins of the life you were supposed to be building becomes suddenly legible as the thing itself. The Saturday morning you used to spend feeling faintly guilty for not being with someone becomes a Saturday morning that belongs entirely to you, which is not nothing. It is, in fact, a very specific kind of luxury that many people with partners quietly miss. None of this is a consolation prize. None of this is what you settle for. This is a life, your life, the one that is actually happening, right now, in this body, in these days. Stay open. That part matters. Don't close yourself off in reaction to disappointment. Don't make an ideology out of solitude. Don't decide in advance that love isn't for you is a way of protecting yourself from wanting it. Stay genuinely open, which means if it comes, good. If it doesn't, also good. Not also acceptable. Actually good. I want to return for a moment to the question of what we pass on, because this is not only about the people living these lives now, it's about what they model, quietly, without intending to. For everyone watching, think about what it would have meant at 24 or 27 to have seen more examples of this, to have encountered more people, men and women both, who were living full, rich, undefended lives without the organizing principle of a romantic partnership at the center, not depicted as cautionary tales, not framed as secretly sad, not positioned as the punchline of some gentle social concern, just living, visibly, contentedly, with all the mess and specificity that living involves. The absence of those models has a cost. When you've never seen the thing done well, you assume it can't be done. You assume that the life without a partner is by definition a diminished life, a life of consolations and substitutes, of brave faces and buried loneliness. And so you keep trying to fit yourself into a shape that may not be yours. You keep reading your life as a problem to be solved rather than a particular kind of story that has its own validity, its own pleasures, its own texture of meaning. The man in the apartment above mine was a model. I didn't know how to read him at the time, but he was. He was showing me something. I just didn't have the eyes for it yet. I think about that man sometimes, the one from the apartment above mine. I think about how I watched him and felt unsettled, that specific discomfort of encountering something that doesn't resolve into a category you recognize. At the time, I read his life as a mystery, a puzzle with a missing piece. I assumed, because I was young and I'd absorbed the story the way everyone absorbs it, that he must be lonely in ways he wasn't showing. I don't think that anymore. I think he had figured something out, not through resignation, not through giving up on anything, but through a genuine and hard-won reorientation. He had stopped measuring his life against a template that wasn't his. He wasn't incomplete. He wasn't broken. He wasn't waiting. He was just living, fully, specifically, with all the texture and pleasure and occasional difficulty that living contains. And he had somehow managed to stop treating that as a problem to be solved. I think about the book under his arm, the garlic smell from the stairwell, the way he laughed at nothing in particular. I think about how those small details, which I once read as evidence of a life incomplete, are actually looked at straight on evidence of a life being lived. A specific, inhabited, unrepeatable life with its own pleasures and its own particular quality of attention and its own kind of beauty. That's what I was seeing. I just didn't have the framework to see it as anything other than absence. Maybe the question, in the end, isn't why you haven't found love. Maybe the question, the more honest one, the one that actually leads somewhere, is why you assumed you had to. Why the presence of love became the thing your life's meaning was contingent on. Why its absence got interpreted as evidence of lack, rather than simply as the particular shape of the story you're in. You were never behind. There was never a script you were supposed to be following. There was only ever this, the actual texture of your actual life, with all its strange incompleteness, and its specific joys, and its particular people, and the quiet Sundays, and the work you care about, and the questions that keep you up at night. All of that, all of it already enough, all of it looked at straight on, already full.